Hi everyone, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to this week's Torah teaching, Parashat Va'era. Parashat Va'era, and it's titled, it means and I appeared. So I'm excited to teach from this teaching today, and it really typically when you teach this parashat, the person who teaches it really focuses on the plagues. I mean, that's kind of the most important part of it. It starts off the plagues, but there's so much context that I really want to set up. I'm going to be teaching the next parashat too, and we're going to go through all the plagues then. This portion actually ends after the plague of hail. And so I'm going to just pick up all the plagues next week, but I really wanted to set the scene for this battle, this cosmic battle that is going to take place between Yahweh and the gods of Egypt. And so I'm going to go back and do some review spend a lot of time in Ezekiel chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. And we're going to go all the way through chapter 6, verse 13. And we're going to pick up next week with chapter 14, with chapter 6, verse 14, and go all the way through the end of Parashat Bo. So are you with me? All right. So I have put my notes that I'm going to be teaching from there. There's a link to them or a file that you can click on and open. I have a lot of stuff as usual to go through. So if you want to just take a moment here and stop and download those or open them up, please feel free to pause and do that. But if you're ready, we can go ahead and get started right now. Okay. So Parashat Shemot, I put up here at the very top, if you got your notes pulled up, I put like a little recap of Parashat Shemot and or Shemot, and just kind of remind you of what happened there. Colin did such a great job of teaching that, so rich. Really, if you haven't had a chance to listen to that, I really encourage you to go listen to it because it was really opened my eyes to so many things I didn't see before, and so that just kind of gives you a recap of what happened really quick. And basically what happens is we're going to pick up here. We're going to go back into, we're going to pick up here sort of where Parashat Shemot left off, if that makes sense. So we're not where it left off, but we're going to pick up midway through the reading. So what I really wanted to do, and the reason I'm doing this is because even though, like I said, it's traditional to focus on the plagues when you're teaching this parashat, I'm choosing to focus on the confrontation between Moses and Pharaoh, and Moses and Aaron and Pharaoh, because it really sets up, like I said, how high the stakes are. You know, it's so easy when we get really familiar with a passage of scripture to read it, and it just becomes really familiar, and we don't know what we don't know about it. We stop recognizing things because we tell ourselves sort of the story that we already know, if that makes sense. And so I want to kind of recontextualize this story, not recontextualize it, but set it within the context of the cosmic battle that it is. And there's so much hidden in the words. You know, I love word studies. Sometimes I know I can geek out a little too much, but there's so much really hidden, so much nuance and layers of meaning hidden in the words that are used in these portions of scripture. Especially, like an example is the word work. There are lots of different words translated to work and labor and, service and work. But we might only see the word work, but when you look in the Hebrew, the word is a different word, it still means work, but it means a different kind of work, or it tells a little bit about the conditions of the work. And so that's just one example. We'll talk about this as we go. So another thing I really want to do is I want to highlight what I call the shape of the empire. We've seen, we did Genesis 1 through 11. We went through the life of Joseph. We've seen God's chosen people come into conflict with or confront or even go to battle against other kingdoms and other kings. And but this is the first time we've really seen God go up against another nation, where God is he's redeeming his people who will be the representatives of his kingdom, the nation of Israel. And he's pulling them out of a fully formed empire. So Egypt is a fully formed, it's not the Tower of Babel that, would have been an empire, but God dispersed those people, right? He just totally took that movement down. But Here, Egypt is a fully formed empire. You know, at the end of the day, it's going to always be, the battle will always be between the empire and the kingdom. And the empire is going to be the strongest imperial system of the world and everything that comes with that, everything it represents. But God's kingdom is different than that. God's kingdom is the way and the will of God, the work of God. And it is always, and this is, so it's always going to be at war with the empire. We're never going to feel at home in the empire. We should feel different than everybody else. Sometimes, you know, we should feel like we don't quite belong in this world. Not being weird or anything like that, but just we should feel almost like foreigners, like people that don't live here, but we are sent here like an emissary. And we'll see that kind of pattern in Moses and Aaron. But I don't want to spend so much time on the introduction. I've already spent enough. So let's just kind of move on to section 1 here, empire fears and empire solutions. So this is from Exodus 1, 8 through 11. And I love that that the book of Exodus kind of starts right here because it tells us right away what Pharaoh's fear is, exactly what he thinks about the Israelites. So let's just read that together. It says, and a new king rose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And Colin did a great job explaining. It doesn't mean that he had no idea who Joseph was. It just means he didn't know. He had no context. He didn't understand the relationship. It's like any kind of transition of power. When somebody new comes, we see this all the time with the presidency. This president wanted this, and this was his inner circle, and this was his cabinet, and these are the policies that he may be put in place that through executive order. And then the next guy comes in and he doesn't like those things and he undoes executive order. He changes the inner circle. He changes the cabinet. And so it goes from person to person and down the road. Things that used to be, we forget why we did things sometimes. And so here we are in this new version of Egypt with the Pharaoh that doesn't really know who Joseph was, doesn't understand why these people, these Hebrews are in the land of Goshen. Who are they? And it says, and he says in 9, he said to his people, look, the people of the Israelites are greater, assume mightier and more numerous than us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, lest they become many. And when war happens, they will also join our enemies and will fight against us and go up from the land. So this is really important. At this time, when the book of Exodus begins, Egypt was, was this big empire, but there were lots of people coming from all over the place, kind of moving in around Egypt, and some people moving into Egypt. There were these foreigners, and so as different, it's kind of like immigrants, but they weren't like immigrants like we might see today, just looking, people coming over and looking for a better life or something like that. These were, groups with armies and might of their own. They were coming from other places in the world, and Pharaoh is looking at threats to his kingdom, even within his kingdom. There's so many parallels today to today, the way the world is today. And it's really because the United States, I think, and this is kind of an aside, I believe the United States has always tried to be like, oh, we're the champions of diplomacy, and if we ever go into another country, we're going to try to find a moral reason to justify it. But now I feel like we're kind of not doing that anymore. We're just like, yeah, we're the empire. We want to come in and take your stuff. We're going to take it. And we're not going to try to say we're bringing democracy. We're just going to say that we have the right to have this. And I'm not criticizing that. I'm just saying, the United States has always been an empire really since after World War II. So they're just admitting it now. We're just, at least we're just admitting it now. But it will do us well to look at the shape of the empire. So like every empire does, the Pharaoh is looking at the threats around him. And specifically, he says, I want to look at these Israelites because they're getting to be so many people. They're outnumbering us and they're becoming strong as a people, right? And he says, come, we must deal shrewdly with them. That word shrewdly, it can also be translated to wisely. But in this context, it really means deceptively. Let's show them how wise we are. Let's show them how smart we are. You might say, let's outsmart them. Let's deceive them, and lest they become many. And then this is his real fear. When war happens, they're going to join up against our enemies and fight us and go up from the land. He senses that the Israelites are really not Egyptians, that they see themselves as distinct. They came from a different family. They have a different history. They've never lived really in Egypt proper. Goshen is on the the outer edges, by the outer edges of Egypt, more where there's shepherds, and already the Egyptians don't like shepherds. They think they're kind of gross. They're like disgusted with them. So Pharaoh is turning his eyes toward the Israelites and he's saying, these people they're a risk. They're like a sleeper cell and there's hundreds of them. And so he looks at them as a threat and he comes up with a solution to deal with them. We're going to look at that in Exodus 1:11-14. And he says, and they, Moses' servants, appointed commanders of forced labor over them in order to oppress them with their forced labor. Okay, so this is where we're going to start looking at some language repeats that are really important, because these words that are repeated are going to give you an idea of points of emphasis in the text. In other words, it means that these are things or patterns that the writer of the text really wanted his hearers to hear and understand and lock into. But because we don't hear it in the Hebrew, we read it in English, we don't see these repeated terms. Okay, and they're going to come throughout the entire study today. So let's look at Pharaoh's solution. When the empire feels confronted, when they feel threatened, they come with force. They come back with oppression, right? So when we're looking at spiritual warfare or even modern warfare, when you are feeling oppression, right? Someone's assessing you for threat. Someone's trying to stop you. Someone's trying to press you down, press you back, because people always say you're getting close to your breakthrough, and that might be so, but sometimes the enemy just zones in on you when you become a threat. And he did this to us. He does it to churches. He does it to movements. He is doing it to Moses here, but he's doing it through his servant Pharaoh. Okay. Pharaoh represents, by the way, the gods of Egypt, but he's also thought to be a god himself. So when Moses comes to confront Pharaoh, we're going to see this. I'll talk about this more when we get exactly there, but Pharaoh is not just the leader of the nation like the president would be. He's also thought of as a god and the representatives of all the gods, and as it's sort of like a priestly figure, and a scholar. And he's like, it's a lot of power and status and money and esteem and authority in one person. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go forward. So solutions are this, and what I've done, you'll see this, I've done like, as I write the Bible verses, I go ahead and where it's appropriate, I put the Hebrew word in brackets, and I'll kind of define it right here. So we're going to read it that way, right? And they appointed commanders, misim, slave gang overseers. So right here, this word misim actually applies not to like managers. It literally means that they have already put the Israelites into gangs of slaves, and they put masters over them, commanders over them, of forced labor in order to oppress them. So this kind of oppression is not just like economic pressure, although that's part of it. It's affliction of the kind that humbles them and humiliates them. It's so interesting to me as I read through the meanings of this word, how similar these tactics were to what was happening during the Holocaust, actually. If you look at how the Nazi Party started off when they oppressed the Jews, the first thing they did was they were like, oh, these Jews, they're our problem, right? We have a problem with them. They're taking up all of our resources. They're taking up all of our jobs. They're not a blessing to our nation. They take from our nation, and they're the reason that they are the reason that we have economic instability and all these things. But the first thing they did was they focused on the Jewish people as a problem to be eliminated, right? And then what did they do? The next thing they did was they started oppressing them. They started making them wear those little yellow stars. They started closing down their business, running their business illegal, or making it very dangerous for them to run their business, or telling people not to go. They started oppressing them and making their work really hard, right? And then they did things just to humiliate them. And I don't want to go into that. It's very sad and it's disturbing. But some of the Kristallnacht. That was a really famous night when it became obvious that the Jews were going to be targeted. After that, their punishment for that was the Kristallnacht was an incident happened, and it was blamed on the Jews. And then the government went to get them and to punish them. And the way that they did it was just to do things that were humiliating to them, cause them to be humiliated in front of their own people and and their neighbors. And so it was a way of breaking their spirit. And it almost made me wonder as I was reading through this, like, did Hitler go read this? Did he read Exodus and like look at what the Pharaoh did and how the Egyptians did and say, I'm going to follow that pattern in some way? Because it really is so aligned. And it could have been that he read it, but I'll tell you another more probable explanation is just that the evil spirit that is the oppressive spirit that inhabits worldly empires has a playbook, and it goes by that playbook, and it's used on the Jewish people and all of humanity really, for millennia, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And we're seeing an exact play being run here, an exact campaign of oppression being run right here in the kingdom in Egypt through this Pharaoh. So it's the kind of oppression that would humble and afflict someone. All right. And then it says, and he humbled and humiliated them with their forced labor, Sabala. I want you to hold on to that word, forced labor. It means compulsory service. It's going to come back again, Sabala. This is one of the words that is translated labor or work throughout this passages that we're going to be studying. And pardon me. They built storage cities for Pharaoh, Pithom and Ramesses. So storage cities were basically places where the excess wealth of the kingdom could go. They would sometimes be storage houses or silos. Like in Joseph's day, there were silos for the excess grain so that the Pharaoh could store them and then redistribute them in rations during the famine. But as wealth began to accumulate, the Pharaoh would have entire cities that were dedicated to nothing but the surplus of the wealth of the kingdom. And it could be grain or gold, any other kind of valuables, also military supplies. And sometimes, in fact, most often, because these things need to be guarded, they were guarded by a military base. And so what the Jews were doing is they were having to go build the instruments of their own oppression. And they would be without while they watched the wealth pour in to the Pharaoh's treasure cities, is what the actual word in the Hebrew is. It's a treasure city. So they were being to build. And again, this reminds me of the Holocaust, that they had to build. They were meant, like the Jews were forced to dig their own graves, and then they would be shot and fall into the graves, or they would have to, build sometimes just the mechanisms of their own destruction. And I don't want to get flagged here on any kind of platform, but for saying words that are keywords. But you know what I'm talking about. So they had to go build the instruments of their own destruction. And it says, as the Pharaoh oppressed them, they became many. So as he was oppressing them, they didn't go away. They grew stronger. And so they spread out. It says they spread out. This word paras, broke forth. They kept breaking forth, just like they would break forth from the womb. And, they kept breaking forth. And the Egyptians were afraid because of the presence or the people of Israel. So look at this word afraid. And I don't like this in the Lexham English Bible. This word kutz, little like kutz, easy to say, it's translated afraid. And that's one way that it can be translated, but actually in the tense that it's written in here, or there's I don't want to get into teaching Hebrew. I'm just learning this myself, but the usage that it falls into in this context really means they were grieved. They began to loathe and abhor the Israelites. They felt a loathing or sickening dread. They just hated them. They would walk past them. It's like when you walk past something that smells bad, you just cover your face, look away. That's how they began to feel about the Israelites. Again, this level of hatred began to rise up. And this is because of the presence of them, because of the sons, the presence of the Israelites and their children. They hated the presence. And really, seriously, the word b'nai doesn't even mean presence. B'nai means sons or people. They started to hate them because of the people, the multiplied presence of the Israelites. And it says the Egyptians ruthlessly compelled the Israelites to work. Ruthlessly, this word parek, with a harsh cruelty that causes fracturing. They were then trying, when this hatred came up, and this is so important, they then began to go beyond work, just like you need to do this, and beyond just harassment, to the point where they wanted to crush the spirits of the Israelites. They wanted to do this work, oversee this work, enforce this work with a kind of cruelty that would break them, that would fracture their soul, that would fracture their spirit, that would break them as a people. And that's, I want to point this out because this is important with spiritual warfare, and it's very important to recognize this spirit today, okay? This is different than just, what's the word I'm looking for? This is different than just all of these things are bad. It's bad to slander someone. It's bad to exclude someone, based on their race or any other kind of way, or just, or to mock someone to make them feel small. But when you start doing things to them because you want to break their spirit, the kinds of things that crush someone's soul, that's hatred. That is born out of a loathing. And you need to understand so much of the things that we see today that's masqueraded as free speech. And yes, there's free speech, and they can say those things. People can say those things, but it is not born out of a desire to have yourself heard. It's a desire to crush someone. And as someone who's been the target of that kind of hatred, it's confusing. When someone really wants to hurt you, when they are taking overt actions to harm you, especially if they used to be your neighbors or your friends, it does something to your psyche. You can't believe it. You can't accept it. It's like you're living in this world where everything seems upside down and backwards, and you don't understand how it got this way. And your soul starts coming crushed because you don't understand what's going on, but it's harmful. It hurts you. And this is how you crush the spirit, right? And this was the kind of cruelty that the Egyptians were using as they oppressed the Israelites. It was that kind of thing. Like, imagine that you were just integrated for 400 years into a nation. Then all of a sudden you start becoming loathed for nothing that you did, just because you had a lot of kids. And people start oppressing you, abusing you. All of a sudden you were free. You were bringing in income, and now you have to stop shepherding your sheep and go work in the slave pits to build the storehouses for the very military that's oppressing you. It just, what happened to the world and my place in it? What's going on? And you kind of can't accept it, and begins to crush you mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, right? Okay, so that was the kind of ruthlessness. And they made them, and they compelled the Israelites to work. And here's another word for work I want you to just zone in on. Avad. Avad. We have a word for the priest, avodah. I have it in verse 14. But the root word of this word, avodah, or avodat, any kind of version of it, variety of it, comes from this root word avad, which you see here in verse 13, where it says, compelled the Israelites to work. Now, this word avad is really important because it can be used to mean worship or work, right? And in fact, sometimes worship and work are the same thing. They're the same thing. And so what you're going to see is this word avad, this word avad, or words that come from the root word of avad, start to be multiplied right here. Now, there's a difference between this forced labor, the sabala, right? There's the brutality, there's the oppression, right? But then when you start getting this work, avad, you're talking about something that comes out of loyalty. It's a perceived duty that you owe someone, either legitimate or illegitimate. That's why the work of the priest is called avodah. That's why Adam's work in the garden, to work the garden, avodah. It means that there is a demand upon you by a person who has the right to make that demand, and you are fulfilling your duty to them. And that's why it's associated with worship, right? Because God has given us this world. He's redeemed us. We've come into covenant with him. So we're giving him his due when we serve him with the works of our hands, with the words of our mouth, with our good deeds, with our love, with our giving. In every way, when we serve God, that's avodah. But it's also work, right? We're doing work for God because he deserves it, because we have that duty. We do it out of love, but we have that duty to him. He has the right to demand it of us and to ask it of us because there's covenant relationship, right? This switch, all of a sudden, what it does is it takes on sort of a religious or spiritual characterization. And this is so important. This brought to mind to me when Jesus said, you can't serve two masters. You'll either love one and hate the other, or hate one and love the other. And you can't serve God and mammon. You can't serve both God and mammon. Mammon used to just mean greed. But as time went on, by the time you got to Jesus's day, it had taken on sort of the shape of this entity. It wasn't just like characteristics or, greedy works that you did or greedy personality traits or whatever. It was like a type of demon. It became like this personification of a certain, it became this image of like a demon or a spiritual entity that personified all of the traits of people who are wicked and hungry for greed, right? And it was a rival lord. See, it's a rival lord to Yahweh. That's kind of how it was pitted. And that's why this is important here, because Pharaoh is a kind of mammon. And what we're seeing here is the people of Yahweh were in the land of Egypt, right? And they have been the people of Israel. I'm sure that they had drifted in their faith over 400 years, especially as time went on and on and on. But here they are where a rival Lord is saying, no, I want your avad. I want your avodah. And your avodah, your energy, the energy of your life, the work of your hands. It's not for you and it's not for Yahweh, it's for me. And you owe it to me and I have the right to take it from you if I want. That's why the bitter, hard work of avodah is a bondage, right? And it's interesting how they say they made their lives bitter with hard work, with mortar, with bricks, with all sorts of avodah, again, in the field with their work, avodah, which they ruthlessly perek and slave them. So we see that word perek again. We see avodah a lot, like many places throughout here, right? And it's especially in this last verse, we see it 3 times. They made their lives bitter with hard avodah, bondage, with mortar and bricks and all sorts of avodah in the field, with their avodah in which they ruthlessly crushed them, crushed their spirits, humiliated them. And every single thing, what this means is in the totality of their lives, no matter what the Israelites were doing, the Egyptian slave masters and the Pharaoh himself sought to make every single thing they did extra work, extra hard. And I mean, we've not to this degree, of course, but we've lived that in a way. Samuel and I have lived that in a way because the people who have oppressed us and harassed us, it has touched every single area of our lives. Even when we try to sometimes pay online with a credit card, it can take us hours because our computers have all this hacking in them and all these, it's worse than hacking. It's interference with our lives. And it's done to make things so hard that people adopt this sort of learned helplessness where they just think it's useless to try to do anything anymore. It's a way of breaking the spirit of someone by making every single thing they do all day long just like pushing a boulder up a mountain, right? And so it's so important. I want to say that you keep your spirit fresh when you are in some kind of oppression or spiritual battle, or even if you're in a battle with a human being, because at the end of the day, the gods of Egypt didn't come out of the sky and do battle with Yahweh. Both the gods of Egypt and Yahweh worked through their human emissaries that confronted each other on the earth and declared the words or the values or the ways of their own gods. But at the end of the day, God said, he didn't say, I'm going to bring judgment on Pharaoh. Or even just Egypt. He said, I'm going to bring judgment, mighty judgments on the gods of Egypt, because this is a fight in the heavenlies with Yahweh reigning superior. So this is really cool. All right, let's go on to the next page. We're on section 2, the confrontation. I've already explained a lot of this. So I'm not going to go into it too much. But Exodus 5:15, the confrontation, you can skip over to Exodus 5 verses 1 through 5. We're going to stay here for a bit. But what I want to set it up with is if you look at Exodus 4:21 through Exodus 6:13. Okay, 4:21 is when God brings Aaron and Moses together, and he tells them to go to Pharaoh and tell him, deliver the message. Right? Exodus 6:13 is where God again, after they've gone and everything's kind of not gone the way they thought, and it was more oppression. And, the people come to Moses and go, why are you bringing all this trouble on us? What do you need? Made God judge you for what you're doing to us? And then Moses goes to God, and God's like. He's like, why did you come here, God? Why did you tell me? I told you it wouldn't work. Why are you doing this to me? Why are you harming our people? And you're not even delivering them. What's going on here? A familiar feeling for some of us when we follow God and things haven't worked out the way we thought that they should. And then the last thing, Exodus 6:13, is God reiterates. He states again his command and commission to Moses, like, go to Pharaoh, go to his house and tell him this, what I'm saying. And you are to lead these people out of here. You're not just going to go talk about things. You are going to lead these people out of here. It's God's final, shut the door on it. I'm not talking about this anymore. Go. So between here and there, there's a series of events. And at the very center of these events, and I'm going to explain this in a second, is Exodus 5:1 through 5. All right. And this is something that is arranged. These events are arranged in something called a chiasm. Okay. Now, a chiasm or chiastic structure is widely recognized by scholars as a very sophisticated literary technique that is used to organize ideas, words, or themes in a symmetrical mirrored pattern. Now, if you have the notes, you're going to find this on page 3. So you don't have to memorize this. And if you look at you're on page 3, section 2, subsection B, I have a little visual diagram kind of of a chiastic structure. All right. It's usually diagrammed using letters A, B, and C. And so let's take a look at this. All right. First you have here, if you look under B, you'll see this, the bold X, right? The main point. In our case, this is Exodus 1 through 5, right? And you'll see that it goes A, B, C, X. That should be a D, but I put X there because I just wanted to do that. And then you'll see how it goes down and toward the center. And then after you get to the X, it kind of pivots and the motion goes down and outward toward this, away from the center. These events sort of mirror each other in a chiastic structure. There's the beginning idea, right, A, and at the top, and then there's the bottom A. And if you look at these two events, right, you're going to see like, oh, these kind of look like each other. They mirror each other. And so if you look at, Exodus 4, verse 21, you're going to see, oh, it starts off, God is telling Moses and Aaron, go speak to Pharaoh and tell him what I'm telling you. And then in A, right at the bottom A, he says, go speak to Pharaoh and tell him what I'm telling you. And so these two are exact, and you can kind of see how the ideas mirror each other. But I'm not going to go through all of that stuff and all the ideas. What's important to me is that you understand that when an author uses this, he is trying to call attention to what is in the middle of the chiastic structure, okay? And here's a little chiastic structure. And if you go try to study this, it's going to be very confusing because it's nested. It's like a whole thing. So just you can go try to study it, but don't worry if you're a little confused because you do have to you have to do a lot of studying. But in this situation, the author, the structure is telling us to pay attention to Exodus 5, 1 through 5, and you're about to see why. Because Exodus 5, 1 through 5 is setting up the cosmic conflict between the gods of Egypt and Yahweh. And it's doing it in a very unusual, a very specific kind of way. It's doing it through using the known court protocols of the ancient Near East during this time. And Israel, Egypt certainly would use the typical court protocols. Now you need to think of this not as Moses and Aaron are not going up here. They're not going into Egypt as like, up to the Pharaoh as like representatives of the slaves. Like we're the slaves and we're the people that they told to, that we're coming up and talking to you, like, would you please let us go have a little holiday? They're not coming from down below as slaves, right? In fact, Moses, I want you to remember this about Moses. Moses was a prince of Egypt. And even though he had an incident where he killed the Egyptian slave master, right? That was beating that was beating the Israelite. He still probably had connections in the court. I mean, no court is perfectly unified, right? No government is perfectly unified. So there had to be people there that would recognize Moses, that would know him. So he's not coming in as a slave. Moses has never been a slave. He doesn't know what that really is. He knows what it is through watching his people, but he himself has never been in slavery. He's a free man, and he was a prince. So he's trained in the ways of Egypt. He knows the playing field that the Pharaoh is playing on. But more important than that, he is an emissary, a royal messenger being sent by the king of another kingdom. And that king is Yahweh, right? And so he's walking in there with Aaron. Now, Aaron has been a slave. He's got, obviously Aaron is the slave that's next to him, but Moses is not a slave. And they're coming in not as underlings, but Moses is coming in as a representative, just as Pharaoh is for his gods. Moses is the representative for his God. And, Pharaoh believes himself to be an actual God, a demigod, a half god. Moses doesn't believe that, but he knows he is filled with the authority in the word of his God. And that is really all you need, And so he's walking in, and this is a real confrontation. I used to think of it like they were kind of going asking please, like kind of pitiful, like, hey, Pharaoh, dear great mighty Pharaoh, we ask you that you would let us go into They're not saying that. Listen to what Moses says. It says, afterwards, Moses and Aaron went and they said to Pharaoh, thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel. Hold on a moment. Yahweh, the God of Israel, you mean all these slaves that are working in Goshen, that are building my cities? Are you trying to tell me that they have another God? Like, what are you talking about? And he's gonna say as much in a second. And he says, and this is what Yahweh says, release, Salah, my people, let them go. Now, this is the first of many let them goes that is going to happen. Release or let them go, some variation of that. My people, so that they may hold a festival for me in the desert. This word Hagag. And Pharaoh said, who is Yahweh that I should listen? Samah. It's the same where we get the Shema from. Who's Yahweh that I should listen, Samah, to his voice to release Israel? I don't know. Yada. That's not just intellectual knowledge. That's experiential knowledge in a way. So even a different meaning. We'll talk about that. I don't know Yahweh. and I will also not release Israel. And they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go, Yalak, on a 3-day journey into the desert, and let us sacrifice to Yahweh our God. And here's something interesting, lest he strike us with a plague or sword. And the king of this Egypt said, why, Moses and Aaron, do you take the people from their work? Ma'as, Maseh, Ma'as, I can't remember, I'm just going to say Maseh, Ma'asa. Ma'asa, I think that's what it is, Ma'asa. Go to Yalak, your forced labor, right? Sabalah. Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are now many. There's this multitude again. This is really a problem for him that they're increasing. And now you want to sabat, that word should sound familiar to you. You want to sabat them from their Sabalah. You want to sabat them from their Sabalah. So you can hear this, Yalek, Sabalah, Sabat, Sabalah. These are repetitive things. You hear this. So I want to go and I want to break these words down again. And I hope you're not getting too tired of this. I hope you're seeing how important this dialogue is because of the kinds of words that are being used here. They really do help to show you how high the stakes were right from the very beginning. This really was not like a slow build up through the plagues. Moses came in with a bang on behalf of Yahweh, and he went straight to God commands you, Yahweh commands you to do this. All right, so let's look at some of these words. Salah just means to send off or send away, send forth, right? That's in verse 1. And Hagag, because that's that sound at the beginning. This is interesting. He says, let us go that we may hold a festival, Hagag, in the desert. And that means it shows an image. So rather than giving a definition like to feast, to hold a festival, to sacrifice, it gives you an image of what the people are doing. This is really important. That word means to move in a circle, specifically to march in a sacred procession, to observe a festival, and by implication, to be giddy, to celebrate, to dance, to keep and hold a solemn festival or feast. And also to reel to and fro. I don't know if that means they were drinking a lot and they kind of started reeling to and fro, or if they did some kind of dance like a reel, like we have in square dancing, I don't know. But there was movement. So when Moses uses this word, there's a different word for sacrifice, okay? Moses isn't using that word. He's painting a picture through his words where Pharaoh, when he hears this word, he's going to imagine his slaves worshiping another god, not the God of Egypt, right? Not the gods that he claims to represent, and certainly not him. He probably has forgotten all about whatever God they claim to have served, and we're going to see why in a minute, like as we get toward the end. But what we're seeing here is that Moses is giving the Pharaoh a picture of the Israelite people gathered into formation in a sacred procession, going out 3 days away outside of his jurisdiction. That's kind of what it means. Like it takes 3 days to get outside of the jurisdiction of Egypt to observe a festival. And when you observe this kind of festival, you will be so happy. You'll be giddy. You'll be dancing. You'll be fulfilling your obligations to your God. And you're going to be maybe having a little something to drink, or maybe doing some kind of special dance that makes you reel to and fro. Who knows? But all of a sudden, when Moses says this, the picture, an image of strong, rejoicing, refreshed, dignified Hebrew people leaving his jurisdiction, leaving him in a solemn procession that might look someone like troops gathered in troops, to go outside of his jurisdiction and become human again. And he cannot handle it. He has worked so hard to strip the Israelites of their humanity. He has worked so hard to crush their soul. He has worked so hard to take every single second of their day and appropriate it to what basically amounts to worshiping him, worshiping his empire, giving all of their resources, all of their breath, the strength of their bodies to build his empire, his kingdom, his wealth, right? And the thought of them taking that strength, that spirit, that body, that energy away from him and giving it to another god, it infuriates him. And so this is what he says. He says, I don't know Yahweh. So first of all, he says, well, let me read this. He says, where is it? He may hold a festival. And Pharaoh said, okay, who is Yahweh that I should listen? Sama. It doesn't mean just hear with your ears. It means hear and obey. And particularly in the court context that we're in Pharaoh's court, like it'd be like if you went to a king's court, right? You got to put that kind of formality on it. It means, why should I listen to him? Why should I give heed to his request? Why should I even consider his request of me? Why should I grant? Your Yahweh is asking me for a favor. Why should I grant it? It's very contemptuous in the way he says it, right? And he says, I don't know Yahweh. And it doesn't just mean like we know that yada means to know intimately. He's not just saying, oh, I don't have a personal relationship with Jesus. Oh, I'm not, I don't identify as a Christian. I don't identify as an Israelite. He says, I don't recognize him. I'm not going to listen to him. I don't recognize his authority. I do not acknowledge him or confess his name. He does not have jurisdiction here, is what that means. He can have all the requests he wants. This is my land. And your God does not have jurisdiction here. And not only that, but I'm not releasing you to go reconnect with him in the desert. I will not release Israel. And they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go. Yalak. And I want you to notice this is different from Salah. On a 3-day journey into the desert. This is where they bring in the 3-day journey. And again, I want to say this emphasizes this is a legal limit to where when you get 3 days outside of a country, right, you are no longer in that country's jurisdiction. This really looks like the slaves running away. It really looks like, remember, what is Pharaoh's fear? If nations come to war against us, these people on the edge of society, they're kind of like not in Egypt proper, they're dwelling out there, on the border. They're going to rise up against us. They're going to organize against us, and they're going to align with those from outside and come in as outsiders to us, and they're going to defeat our country. Now what Moses is saying to him is like, we want to go outside of your jurisdiction in an assembly, right? And we'll come back. So there really is like, okay, but who's waiting out there? Is it really your God? And then there's also just exactly what Pharaoh is going to say. There's, how will the work go on if you leave? Like, no. And so he says, I don't know your God. I don't follow him. I don't confess his name. I don't care about his power. He doesn't have jurisdiction here. So I'm not going to let you go. And then they say to him, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go, Yalak, on a 3-day journey into the desert, and let us sacrifice to Yahweh our God, lest he strike us with the plague or with the sword. So that word Yalak means, let me finish reading. And the king of Egypt said, why, Moses and Aaron, do you take the people from their work? Let me go back here. This is better. I'm just kind of looking at this. Pardon me while I do this. Yeah, let us go, Yalak, on a 3-day journey, and let us sacrifice to Yahweh our God. And this is the weird thing. Lest he strike us with a plague or with a sword. Okay, hold on a minute here. First of all, why is there a movement? When they come in, they say release, Salah. Then they say, let us go, Yalak. Well, if you look at this word Yalak, it doesn't mean just like we would like to move forward or we want to go on a trip. It has a really specific meaning. It's the root word is where we get the word halakha from. Halakha. It's the word that you use for walking in the way, right? So in Genesis 17, when it says walk, if you follow God, you walk in his ways. If you follow me, if you walk in my ways, or Enoch walked with God, we walk, this person walks in the paths of God. It's that kind of thing. It's not just, we're going away to visit God. It's let us go so that we can walk in the ways of Yahweh. We can learn to walk toward him, we want to align our ways with his ways. We want a cultural distinction. We want a religious distinction. We want to go back to our God and learn to walk in his ways. Remember that verse. Come, let us go up. It says all the nations in the end they'll all say, come, let us go up to the mountain of our God and to the house of the God of Jacob. And what does it say? He will teach us his ways and we will walk in his paths. We will halak. We will do halakha. Halakha is another word for the ways that we follow the law. When you do a Seder, right? When you do a Jewish Seder, Passover Seder, there's like a little liturgy, we would call it, that you do. There's a way to do, there's a prescribed way to do the feast that God is going to bring up, the appointed times. That's halakha. I don't know how you say it, but halak. It comes from this word yalak. It can have an H or a Y at the beginning. They use both. But this is what they're implying. We're going to go do God's ways now. We want to be released to go do. This doesn't sound like, hey, give us a little holiday. We'd like to go to the beach. What Pharaoh is hearing is a challenge to his authority, a challenge to his, really, when it comes down to it, his ownership of the people of Israel. He believes that he owns the people of Israel. That's what he's come to believe. These are my people. I own them. I will do with them what I please. And they're coming to him saying, you don't own us. You're not really the boss of us. God's called us. And this is what I want to pull out here. When Moses and Aaron came back and they said, let us go sacrifice to Yahweh, or lest he strike us with a plague or a sword. And I was like, shouldn't that say, lest he strike you with a plague or a sword? But no, Moses is saying, if we don't go sacrifice to Yahweh, he's gonna strike us with a plague or a sword. So why does Moses say that? Is he kind of just trying to hint at the Pharaoh that, if he's going to punish us, he's going to punish you too? No. Moses is doing something that we will all miss as Westerners who do not live in the ancient Near East, because he is invoking covenantal loyalty and covenantal faithfulness to a higher king. There's a sort of treaty like covenant made in the ancient Near East called a suzerain vassal. You probably have heard of this before. Some of you might have. And the suzerain vassal covenant was like a contract, a compact. It was a big deal, right? And if you were we have this now kind of even all over the world with our military. We make agreements with people, like NATO is kind of like this, right? It's like, okay, you're going to pay, if you're a smaller nation, let's say, or a smaller, a less powerful person, you need the protection of, or the resources of, or the infrastructure of, or something from another higher authority, power, nation, stronger entity. You can come into a covenant with them where you, the smaller nation, are the vassal, and the higher, more powerful party is called the suzerain. So it's a suzerain vassal. And in this covenant, both parties have a duty, right? They're making an agreement, and both parties have obligations that they're going to fulfill certain stipulations of the covenant. And as the suzerain, he or she or the nation or it vows to protect, provide, whatever they're being asked to do. And they're going to do that in exchange for something from the vassal, which usually back then it was a tribute, they would or a tax of some sort, or maybe if we ever go to war, you promise that you're going to send your men with us. That's a lot of that happened in feudal times, where the lord of the manor would give, he would let people live there and work the fields, but then if he had to go to war, they all had to come with him. I mean, this is kind of the same thing. So when Moses said to Pharaoh, let us sacrifice to Yahweh our God, lest he strike us with a plague or a sword, he was alerting Pharaoh, we are already in a suzerain vassal contract. We have pre-existing obligations to another king, Yahweh. And I love this, because if you go back to verse 3, it says, and they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. That word met doesn't just mean like, hey, we had a meeting with him. It means he showed up suddenly. All of a sudden he showed up. We haven't seen him in a long time. And out of nowhere, he appeared. And now he's here. And he's saying, I haven't been around in a while. I came back to check. Where have you been? What's going on? And now that he's here, he wants to renew the terms of his covenant with us. He's coming back to get what's his. Pharaoh thinks the people of Israel are his to release or not. But Yahweh says, oh, I'm sorry. I don't know. You probably didn't know this, but I've got a pre-existing covenant with these people. And this brings to mind Deuteronomy 32, where it says, ask and your father, ask them. Anyway, it talks about how God, I can't remember it when I need to, but it says how God apportioned all the nations, to the Elohim, or, to the B'nai Elohim. He apportioned the nations and gave them their boundaries. But it says, but Jacob, he kept as his portion. He chose as his portion. This is really interesting, because everybody else had a land that they were being sent to. But God didn't choose a land, right? The other people, the boundaries of the nations, people and land were drawn out. But when Yahweh chose his portion, he chose the people. He didn't have a land. He didn't choose a land right then. He had a land in mind for sure. But when he chose his portion, he chose Jacob. He chose a people. And now he has come back for his people. And listen, there is so much we can learn about Revelation here. It's like the parable of the landowner, or the rich man who owned fields and owned homes, and he went away he was gone a long time, and then he came back to check. And it was like the servants that he left over his people had beat them and abused them, right? And he's like, I'm back. Where are my people? And they just kind of like, they had come to the conclusion after so long that these are their people. They're not God's people. They're not the master's people. They're their people, and they can do whatever they want to them. So they killed them, right? So this is what God is doing. He's saying, hey, I've come back to check. Where are you? What's going on with my people? Oh, you've got my people. I am coming back for what's mine. And then the rest of that parable that I'm referencing goes on to say, and so the landowner went back and he then sent his son. He said, surely they will listen to my son. If they killed his son too, as we know that they did to Jesus, right? So it's almost like this is Yahweh coming the first time and saying, hey, I'm taking my people back, right? And then Jesus, the son, is coming again and saying, I'm here to take my people back. And the tone deafness is the same. But we see the Lord, the master, who has come back for what is his and is ready to take it. And Moses, by using this language of, if you don't let us go, God, and we can't go sacrifice to Yahweh, our duty is to sacrifice to him. And if we don't do it, he's going to strike us because we have a covenant with him. We're not yours, Pharaoh. We already and we always have belonged to someone else. That's not you. So, yes, I've gone for almost an hour now. And so even though I have much, much more to say, I'm going to have mercy on all of you. And I'm going to close up now. I have all of these notes. Maybe I'll come back next week or give you some little bonus showings or recordings or whatever. But I want to wrap this up right here. So the king of Egypt said, and this is his reply, okay, let us go learn his ways. We're going to walk in his ways. We're already in covenant with him. He's coming back to take what's his. And listen how the king of Egypt, listen how the Pharaoh responds. He says, why, Moses and Aaron, do you take the people from their work? Doesn't just mean like the work they're doing, but why do you keep them from producing the product of their work? Why are you taking them away from making bricks? They have quotas to meet today. There's a work product that they're being paid to, that they're not being paid to, that they have to produce for me. Why are you making them stop producing for me? And then he turns their own words on him and he says, Yalak yourself to your own forced labor. He's reminding them, you want to walk in somebody's ways, make your way all the way back to the slave pits. And while you're at it, Moses, go ahead and enlist for your compulsory service because you are nothing but a slave. He is trying to to humiliate them and strip them of their position and dignity. And Pharaoh said, look, the people of this land are now many, and you want to sabat them from their Sabbalah. There's a real play on words. They're not going to have a Sabbat. They're going to have Sabbalah. You're going to go to Sabbalah. There will be no Sabbat, and they're going to have Sabbalah. And this is going to be the way you walk in forever, Moses. Now, this was really, wow. Pharaoh is not just like, yeah, I'll think about Yahweh's request. He's saying, no, you don't have jurisdiction. Your people, I've got them. You're not getting them back. And by the way, your emissary, your ambassador that you sent, you think he's appear to me? No, I'm going to take him captive and make him go and put him in the slave camps and take him as a prisoner and use him as a slave. That is what Pharaoh was doing. And how do we know that? Because that was very typical in that time. It wasn't respected. You kind of weren't supposed to do it. But if a king sent you a message, sent another king a message that they thought was particularly odious and disgusting, and it was repugnant to them, they would keep the emissary and imprison him or detain him. We saw Joseph kind of do this. He was messing with his family, but when he detained Benjamin, right, he was saying, oh, you came and brought me this message. I'm going to keep you detained longer. I don't like this. That signaled the displeasure of Joseph to his brothers, because this is what kings or rulers did when they got a message they did not like. They would keep the emissary and detain them unreasonably long. And so that's what Pharaoh is saying. Not only are you not going, but you're now staying here. You're not going to be running off to the wilderness anymore. You have a lot of labor, forced labor, compulsory service to make up, Moses. You better get to it. And then he turns it's like he's flicking his nose at God. So this is Pharaoh, and he embodies the empire. And this is the kind of arrogance that happens today when you look at the spirit of the empire. So I'm going to give you a little homework assignment I'd like for you to try this week. just based on what we've read today and what we studied today, even though I know it's not technically in the reading, so I'm sorry about that. I'll try to make up the difference next week. But where do we see, look, keep your eye out for the attitude of the empire in our everyday lives. We talked about at a Bible study recently that, the feeling of being in the world but not of it, and especially not of the world, is becoming more and more pronounced among the true followers of Jesus. And we need to understand when we are feeling this way, when we're noticing these characteristics, we're hitting up against the spirit of the world, the spirit of the empire, which is really just the spirit of mammon, which is really just the spirit of the Antichrist. It is the eternal and forever, or at least maybe not eternal because it will be vanquished, but for as long as we live in time and space, it is the named, the most, the nemesis of the kingdom of God, and it won't win, but it will be always like the seed of the serpent. It embodies the seed of the serpent that seeks to wear out the people of God. So I hope you learned a lot from today. There's a lot I could go on with, but I've gone long enough. And you guys be blessed. We love you, and we'll see you again next time. Look forward to discussing this with you.